We are ready to start on the shower in the master bathroom. This is written April Off-Grid. We've spent the last year building our off-grid home from the ground up. This shower stall is the last major project to finish up our home. I haven't done anything to the shower stall area yet, so it's just rough framed, and the first step is to add some 2x4s in strategic places to mount things to. I'll be mounting some vertical 2x4s, mostly in the corners so that I have a good place to attach my backboard to. Then I'll mount some horizontal pieces in between the uprights to give me a place to attach the faucet in the shower to, and also to make accommodation for some future grab bars. And now moving on to plumbing. I have the faucet here and I'm doing the prep to get it ready to install. There are 3 fittings I need to add before I can mount it. 2 are for the hot and cold water coming in. Those are PEX lines, and so I'm using a 1/2-inch brass fitting that screws into the faucet, and then I'll have a crimp side for the PEX. And on the top, the fitting going up to the shower fitting itself, I have a shark bite fitting. The shark bite fitting allows me to use a piece of brass pipe and slide it in. It seals with an O-ring, and so it allows me to forego the brazing process. So I'm happy to be able to skip that. I just cut my piece of brass to length, slip it into those shark bite fittings, make sure it's all the way in, and then I'm ready to attach my faucet. So here I'm attaching the faucet, getting it good and secured. This fitting up top is a 90 that has an accommodation to attach it to the wall, so it has a little kind of built-in bracket, and it has a slip fitting on one side and then a threaded fitting on the other side for the shower arm. I'm ready to attach the PEX that I have coming up over from the manifold. This has been protected since we built the foundation, and now I'm just unwrapping it and getting it ready to make the final attachments here. Had some electric tape tying it together and blocking off the end so stuff didn't crawl inside. It wasn't quite long enough, so I needed to cut it down, add a coupling, and make accommodation for an additional piece to make up the extra length. I just needed another 6 or 8 inches, and so I was able to just cut everything the right size, add a coupling in there real quick, and make the connections. I'm using the crimp connections on these. They work really well, they're inexpensive, and easy to do. So far I've had a 100% success rate. I haven't had any of these leak on me yet, so it seems to be a very reliable system. This base for the shower we haven't done anything to. We didn't pour the pad here, it's just a hole that goes right down to the dirt underneath the house. Over a year ago when I put this pipe in, I did put the P-trap in. So the P-trap is buried down under here a ways, and this pipe was a little crooked, and so that's why I'm digging it up a little bit. I wanted to see if I could straighten it a little bit, and so I just removed some of the dirt around it, tweaked it over to one side, and now I'm packing the dirt back in, and that seemed to help. The next step is to cut the drain to height in preparation for pouring the concrete base of the shower. And so I have the flange that I'm going to be using, and I'm trying to figure out the heights. This bigger piece that I have slipped over the black piece is going to protect it from the concrete. So that's a shield that'll keep the concrete from coming in around it, and that's also the right height so that when I pour the pad, I'll just pour to that height. This flange that I'm looking at is the flange that we'll be using. It's a Schluter brand flange, and I'm trying to figure out how this whole system works so I can get the height just right. Well, I'm committed now. I've cut it off to height. I think I've got all my elevations right. This is the tricky part. I have to figure out the elevation of the flange, and then I have to work backwards from the elevation of the flange to give myself a little bit of room for the top layer that'll be tapered and for the entire base layer, which will just be a hard concrete slab. Here's my setup to mark our line around the perimeter to pour the concrete to. I'm actually going off of the bottom of this board, which goes off the bottom of the flange, and so it'll leave me about an inch space to do the dry pack and get that taper set. I now have the elevation marked on the perimeter for the concrete pour, and I also have the white pipe in the middle set to the right height. I'll be pouring the pad to the top of that white pipe, and that'll help me get it all level and to the right height. But then later I'll have to come back in from the inside and cut out about 1/2 inch of the top of that white pipe in order to give myself enough width for the Schluter flange to fit down into far enough to reach that black pipe below. I packed the gravel down and then put down a plastic vapor barrier, and now I'm ready to go with the concrete. Just using the cement mixer to mix up a couple of small batches and carrying it in with 5-gallon buckets. Concrete pours, for me, inevitably end up taking more material than I expected and being more work than expected. I thought maybe one batch would do it. I ended up making 2 or 3 batches and many trips inside with a 5-gallon bucket. Of course, it's only filled halfway or so. But anyway, it took quite a bit to get this filled up and ready for finishing. It's a good thing that we didn't pour this shower base when we poured the rest of the pad. Doing it later allowed us to get the elevations just right, and we ended up pouring it lower than the rest of the pad in order to leave room for a dry pack, and it also allowed us to just get it lower so we didn't have such a tall curb. Well, we're now ready to install the backing board, and for this I'm using a cement fiberboard. We've had the cement fiberboard purchased for a while. It's been waiting for my attention. When we bought it, we hadn't researched what shower system we were going to use. We ended up going with the Schluter Kerdi system, which is a waterproof membrane system, and we found out that you didn't need to use a cement fiberboard backing. You could get away with just drywall, which we probably would have used, but we'd already bought this stuff, and so we decided to use it since we had it. Last time I used the cement fiberboard was on the guest bathtub surround, and I used the score and snap method, which was very difficult. After seeing my struggles, some of our viewers suggested a special blade that they make for this. I didn't realize it was out there. It's pretty pricey, but I went and got one because it was such a struggle last time, and this blade is amazing.
I have my glasses on. Be good real quick.
It makes the whole process very easy. It cuts through it just like wood or any other material. The only thing is that it creates a very dangerous dust, very bad for your lungs, and so you need to be wearing good respiratory protection when you do this. I'm using a half-face respirator with P100 filters. It's amazing the amount of cutting that was required for this project. These boards come in a funny size. They're 3 foot by 5 feet. And the width of the shower was just a little over 3 feet. It was 38 inches, and so I couldn't use the width to go up, so I ended up having to cut a bunch of pieces in order to fill the span. Most of the pieces went in really fast, but some, like this one, I really struggled with. I was trying to get a good tight fit up against this drywall along that seam, and I was really struggling. First I tried trimming the drywall, and then I ended up trimming the piece. Well, I finally got this piece fitting right and screwed in. I have the 2 easy sides done now. The remaining side that I'm about to work on now has the faucet there, so I'll have to create some openings and work around that. Sadly, the size of this shower being just over 3 feet has worked out to where there's a lot of waste material. Since I couldn't use the 3 foot width of the material to cover the full span, I ended up having to turn them on their side and then cut off almost 2 feet of every piece, but we are setting them aside. We might be able to use them somewhere else, possibly in our son's house. I have a little workstation set up on sawhorses, and I have it set up a little ways away from the house just so the dust doesn't migrate over to the house. Before I could install this piece, I needed to do something about these water lines. They kind of bow out a little bit, and I didn't want them rubbing on the back of that cement fiberboard because it's really harsh, and so I decided to go ahead and put a foam wrap around them so that they'll have a cushioning layer between them and the concrete fiberboard. With that done, I'm ready to install the piece that I had just cut. I can just kind of push it in place. It'll move those hoses back, and then I can screw it in. This next piece will have to go over the faucet, so I'm going to have to make 2 holes in the piece. And those have to be precisely measured, so I'm taking some measurements and writing that down. Once outside, I got a fresh piece and started doing all the layout. I had to mark the width. I did that first and used a straight edge to get a good square line along that side. And then I was ready to mark out the place for the faucet openings. I've got 2 holes that'll have to line up perfectly there. Once everything was marked, I went ahead and got my saw and cut off the excess material from the side, and then I was able to get a couple sheets and prop it up so that I had a void under the area that I'm going to be opening up those holes in. The reason I need a little space is because I'll be using a hammer to create these holes. Just a hammer. I'm using a ball peen hammer, and I'm using the round side, the back side of the ball peen, in order to create these holes. I just start hammering in the places where it was marked, and it really busts out easily. This is the official proper way to do it as far as I know, and it's actually quite accurate and works really well. Now I'm bringing it inside and getting ready to do a little test fit here, see if it fits, and it looks good. It actually fits the first time. One thing I will mention here is that I'm leaving an 1/8 of an inch gap between the pieces, and so I had to take that into account when I marked my holes. This is the last piece here. It also has a little hole that I'll have to cut for the shower arm. This is a really messy process. It's very dusty, and this dust is really bad stuff, so I'll be glad to be finished with this and moving on. These are the last few cuts on the last board. And now I'm just screwing in the shower arm temporarily so that when I put this last piece on, I can verify that the hole is in the right place. And just about to do a test fit here. And it looks like it fits, and so almost done here. Just got to screw it into place and the backer will be complete. We're now ready to install the Kerdi membrane. I'm cutting the fabric first and getting it all cut to size first before I put up any mortar. That way when I get the mortar up over the wall, this piece will be ready to apply. And now I'm mixing up the mortar. We've never done this before, but I understand that it needs to be pretty thin. I hope this is the right consistency. Everywhere. Oh, sponge. Yeah, the experts just make it look so freaking easy. Meanwhile, it's going to drip off my trowel every direction I go. It's just not easy, you know. So. I was just mentioning how the experts make this look so easy, but it's actually pretty difficult and messy. Here's April wiping some off my face. I got a big glob on my face as I was trying to get it on the wall. I'm just putting on the base coat or the wet coat here. I'm just trying to cover the entire wall with the layer of mortar. And then next I'll go through with my trowel, which is a special trowel that's the recommended size for Kerdi. I believe the grooves are 1/8 inch by 1/8 inch in order to get the lines on, and then I'll be ready to apply the membrane. While we were putting the first piece up, the camera lost focus. We didn't get much video of it, but here's the first piece applied. It really wasn't too bad. Once you stick it on the wall, it sticks really good, and then you just need to flatten it out, which didn't take too long. So I'm cleaning up the tools and getting ready to apply the next piece. So far, I'm really loving the Schluter system, but there is one problem. We were not able to buy the Schluter brand mortar locally, and if you can't use their brand name stuff, they recommend that you use an unmodified mortar, and that's the only way they'll warranty the product. However, if you look right on the bag of any unmodified mortar you buy, it does not recommend that it's used in this application. So if you use an unmodified mortar, you're using it in a way that it's not meant to be used, And if you don't use an unmodified mortar, then Schluter won't warranty it. And so it's a big pain, and there's quite a raging controversy on it online. And it's funny because the Schluter brand mortar is modified, but they say if you don't use their brand, then you have to use unmodified. And therein lies the problem. If we could have bought their mortar, we would have bought it and just used it, but we couldn't find it anywhere. We would have had to driven hours to a big city, and even there you can't find it in the big box stores. They sell the Schluter membrane and stuff, but they don't sell the mortar. You have to go to a specialty store in a big city in order to find their Schluter brand mortar. And so it's a huge pain. We ended up doing some research online and going with a modified mortar that was not the Schluter brand. We're confident that this solution will work, but we cannot recommend it because it voids the warranty from Schluter. We're now applying the second membrane. You just put it in place, start smoothing it out with your hands, and then go over it with a 4 or 6 inch joint knife and get all the excess material scraped out from underneath and get it all nice and smooth. I'm just finishing up the second piece and almost ready to move on to the third and final piece. So I'm cutting that here. This piece will cover the wall that has the faucet and shower head on it, so there'll be some extra detail here. I've marked it and now I'm cutting the holes for the faucet handles just using a pair of scissors. The width of the Kerdi membrane has worked out pretty nicely for the shower. It comes in a 39-inch width and our shower is 38 inches wide, so it's worked out pretty good. You're supposed to have at least 2 inches of overlap to form the connection between the different layers. And here we are doing a test fit just to make sure we got the holes in the right place before we apply the mortar. And that fit good, so I'm ready to apply the mortar here. One thing that's nice is we didn't have to tape the seams. You can see I'm just mortaring over a seam there. Normally, if you were going to use some kind of a red guard paint or something, you'd have to tape and seal those seams before you did it. But since the membrane covers everything, there's no need to tape and seal the seams in your backer, which was super nice. That was very convenient. And I'm almost ready to apply, just putting the final grooves in with the trowel. This stuff has actually been pretty easy to work with. It hasn't been as bad as expected. I was dreading it a little bit, but I found that as long as we get it straight when we first go on, it's actually pretty easy to work. The smoothing out part is kind of fun. You just go over it several times with this joint knife and kind of work out all the extra material out from underneath, make sure it's really well attached. But it's kind of a fun process. It's really easy. This is where you get all your wrinkles out. You make sure it's all smooth and well attached. It's kind of like putting a screen protector on your phone. You're trying to get all of the air bubbles out and make sure it's all smooth. What I ended up using for the corner was a large, long trowel, and I would hold it in the corner and kind of put pressure on the corner, and then I'd use another trowel in my other hand to pull the excess material out from underneath, and that worked really well. It kept the membrane tight up against the corner, and I was also able to scrape it out really good on the other side. And it keeps the corner nice and square and allows me to really get the seam, that overlap seam, nice and clean. That's the last big piece finished, and now we just need to cover up a few inches that we had left over on the edge here. This system is real forgiving in that it doesn't really matter how you overlap things as long as you get at least 2 inches overlap in every direction. So I just put on the mud and then made sure we had good overlap and put on this last piece. Well, it's nice to have that done. Now I'm ready to get back to the base. I need to mount this flange, but it interferes with that white piece of pipe that I had holding the concrete back, so I need to remove a little bit of it. I'm using a little inside cut attachment on my drill to cut it out from the inside, and then I'll be able to just chip it out with the screwdriver. Easy, it wants to pop out, you know?
A little cheap screwdriver.
Yeah. That provides the necessary clearance for me to get this flange down and all the way over that 2-inch drain pipe. Did a little test fit here to make sure it's sliding all the way down over, and I'll be able to make a real good connection, and then I'll check the level to make sure that the level is going to work out okay. Well, that looks good. I'm going to go ahead and glue it up, and I'll put the level on it as the glue is drying and try to tweak it a little bit to try to get it as perfect as possible. I'm just using some all-purpose cement here, putting some of that on both sides of the connection. I want to make sure that as this goes on, I get a full fit so that it fits all the way down. So it slid down, I think I'm good, and then now I've got the level on, and I'm just making some minute adjustments, trying to hold it as the glue dries, trying to get it as level as I possibly can. In the end, I wasn't able to get it perfect, but I think it'll work. The next thing I need to do is mark the level for the dry pack base, but I don't have a laser level, so I had to figure out a different way. It's recommended that you have at least 1/4 inch of drop per foot, so I decided to round up and go to 1/2 inch of drop. And so what I did was found a 1/2 inch thick board, and I put a level on that board, and then I just went out from the edge of the flange and put a mark on the top of the board, and so that gives me 1/2 inch of drop all the way around. So I went around and put a bunch of little marks, and then I got that same board and filled in the gap between the marks, or basically just made a long continuous line all the way around. And then of course I had to go back and double check that several times and make sure it was all accurate and as perfect as I could get it. And I think this is going to work. This gives me a nice even parameter all the way around that's level, and I have at least 1/2 inch of drop all the way around to ensure good drainage. We're using a dry pack method to form the base. The material that we're using for the dry pack is called deck mud. That's actually what it says on the bag that you get at the hardware stores, deck mud. And when you're mixing it up, from what I understand, you're supposed to have it kind of like sandcastle sand, or about that consistency, to where it'll pack and hold together, but where it's not muddy at all. So I'm just mixing it in the wheelbarrow, using a little hoe to mix it and kind of mixing it by hand, testing it as I go. I want to make sure that I get the right amount of moisture in this, because it's pretty critical to the way it sets up. First I needed to wet down the floor surface so it doesn't suck all the moisture out of this product. And then I needed to make up a special little batch to tuck in underneath this flange to kind of fill in that gap. And so I just mixed it right on the floor here, and I added a little extra water to make that part that I was putting under the flange a little muddier, a little wetter. Once I had that all thoroughly packed in underneath and had that void completely filled, I was ready to work on the rest of the space. And now I'm ready to start developing that taper and work on the rest of the base. So I'm just putting some of the product in. It actually takes quite a bit. I decided just to dump it in. It's kind of sandcastle sand consistency, and I want to get plenty in there, start spreading it around, and then start lightly packing it down. I forgot to put a plug in this drain first, so April got me an old rag, and we're stuffing that in just to keep excess material from falling down in the drain. This first batch that I made up didn't go as far as I expected. It filled up maybe 1/6 of the base, and so I need a lot more. And so it's back outside to mix up another batch. I'm glad that I bought several bags. I bought more than I thought I would need, and it looks like I'm going to be using it all. I tried to make up a little bit more in this batch, and here I am pouring it in and getting ready to level. I think this will get me almost half of the way through. So I have enough here that I can start working, and I'm going to try to get it leveled and get that taper built. So I'm just filling it in. I'm using this little tamper to lightly pack it as I go. I'm not packing it very much, just a little bit of pressure, just to tamp it in a bit, and then I'm using that to get it close, and then I'm using this stick to carefully follow that mark that I made on the wall. And so I put it on the mark on one side and put it on the flange on the other side, and so I'm trying to make a flat, level plane between that mark and the flange. I have seen people cut a piece of foam or something and put it along the outside edge to use as a guide between the outside wall and the flange, and that looked like that worked really well. I just didn't have any material that I thought would work real good for that, and so this is a little bit more challenging way to do it. It took a little bit of extra time, but I felt like it worked out okay. I've never done a dry pack base like this. We're just following the instructions we saw on a guy that did a really good video of it on YouTube. We'll put a link to that in the description. As we were doing this, the consistency of this deck mud is reminding us of our first attempt at an earthen floor, which didn't work out well. It didn't set up, it was too sandy, and so we became concerned as we were doing this that it wasn't going to set up very well. We came back an hour later, it wasn't setting up great, so we decided to add some more water. We sprayed it all down with the water bottle, ended up adding quite a bit of moisture to it, and we packed it down some more. In the end, it all worked out well. It did set up firmly, but it was touch and go there for a while. We do feel like we got to it soon enough before it occurred that extra water helped and we kind of saved it, but I think the problem was I just didn't add enough water while I was doing my initial mixing. That's kind of the problem of just watching a video to learn how to do something. It's really hard to judge, consistency of something that you've just watched somebody else do in a video. We found that before when we were doing our earthen floors. There's some things that you just have to learn by trial and error, and so glad it worked out for us in the end. Well, I think we'll wrap it up here. In our next video, we'll be putting on the curb, finishing up the base, doing the tile, and completely finishing up the shower. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.